Welcome to Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Sleepy Z's Masonry. Thank you for joining us today for episode 146. My guest today for part two of my podcast with him is Thaao Penghlis. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank our two new sponsors for Think Big with Michael Zellner. They are Roof and Nail and Buckley's Grill. Roof and Nail is one of the leading experts in insurance restorations. Co-owner Kelly Potter and his crews are the preferred vendors of many mainstream insurance companies focused in the tri-state areas of Tennessee, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And not only can Roof and Nail provide you with the best evaluation on your roof to see if you qualify for insurance approval, but they can also provide you with a competitive bid for any out-of-pocket roof projects. Big or small, they do them all. And Buckley's Grill, which is a place that I've been going to, since they've opened over 30 years ago. They're a little hidden gem here, if you're seeking a fantastic dining experience in Memphis. They're locally owned by Jeff Urinelli and Ken Dick. They've specialized in steaks and Southern hospitality, as I said, for over 30 years. And this upscale restaurant boasts a contemporary atmosphere with a touch of classic elegance. And from the moment you step inside, you're greeted with friendly faces, warm hospitality. The food is amazing. The people that wait on you are amazing, and you're going to feel right at home. If you haven't seen part one yet of my interview with Thaao, not only is he a very famous soap opera and television actor, but he's also an author, a writer, and now he's a podcast host too. He's been on several television shows throughout his career, and his big break came in 1981 on the soap opera General Hospital, playing Victor Cassadine during the Luke and Laura era. He also starred on Santa Barbara and the network television show Mission Impossible, as well as other guest appearances on other TV shows in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. He's best known for playing the dual character role of twin brothers Tony and Andre Dimera. He talked about some of those experiences in part one. And today for part two, we'll talk a little bit about more of his time on Days of Our Lives. But our main focus will be talking about his new podcast, which is called The Lost Treasures. Thanks for coming back on the show today, Thaao.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I thought, what do you want to talk about this time? You speak about days. I don't know how many stories I have left, but
I got some good questions for you.
the thing is,
I have a few more good questions for you. Yeah, and then we're going to, because like I said, your new podcast, as I was telling you before we got on air, I've listened to the first 4 episodes and they're really awesome. Just for a little history, for some that may not know, that the show Days of Our Lives exists in the fictional world of Salem. And Thaao first premiered on the show back on November 6, 1981. It was on and off the show for 4 decades through 2019. That's beyond amazing for a character on a TV show to be on it for that long of a period of time. He won several awards in his career, including twice Outstanding Lead Actor for a Drama Series, with the last one coming in 2020. So, just recently on my Facebook page, I was going to tell you, I posted a picture of both, I was promoting our second podcast, and I posted a picture of both you and Joseph Moscolo of blessed memory. Y'all were side by side. And for those that don't know or remember, which most people that are, I would say 35 and up do, Stefano Dimera, the character he played, was your father on the show. And on my post, I said, quote, "Kids these days will never know how much stress these 2 men gave us, our sisters, mothers, grandmothers, and aunts," unquote. Which is very true. I remember the stress.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's usually us who are going through the stress of acting it out, but
right.
I don't realize that the people who are watching are being
stressed.
Oh,
yeah, it was always stressful. Yeah. What do you believe it was about, these 2 characters, and 3, if we count your twin brother, Andre, who you obviously played, that continued to make, television viewers tune in every Monday through Friday to see what would happen in the next storyline, but at the same time, as I mentioned above, cause us loyal viewers a lot of anxiety too? What do you think it was?
Joe and I, because we trained in the same workshop, and also I got Joe. a lot of people were intimidated by Joe. Um, I understand why. He was a very powerful. That voice was enough, to blast you out of the room. Um, but there was a respect between the two of us. And because we had the same teacher and we watched each other for quite a few years in workshop. And of course, I was the reason why Joe was actually playing my father, because I said that there was this actor, if they were going to bring my father in, that they should look at. And that was Joe. And when they met Joe, they were taken. And the fact that both of us looked ethnic, we're both Southern European heritage. And both of us loving music, especially classical music. We loved history. We loved so many things. Even sharing a cocktail before we went on. Joe would call me into his dressing room and say, let's have a strega. I mean, that was for real. I mean, he brought that as the character. But we would have it. It gave us a little bit of a edge. And so we'd go on. And there were times where Joe didn't like certain dialogue and he wanted to cut it out. And that's the only time we really had a bad time with each other, because I felt it was my responsibility to make it work, whereas he wanted to change the dialogue. And I know how writers felt about that. They didn't like actors coming in and changing their dialogue or rephrasing it as some actors do. So I always think, well, this is a challenge. Let's try and make it work. So both of us had our own thrones as characters. The same teacher that taught me how to make an entrance through doing a play called Jockeys in New York and playing Balanchine and coming on stage 40 times before he decided I knew the walk. There's something about that kind of training that is imbued within your own personality. Joe was, he was a musician as well, and he was well versed. So when you get two personalities that are used to leadership, and it will clash eventually, like my father and I would clash, except I got to understand my father a little better because he wasn't as strong as he would have liked to have been because of the circumstances in the way he had to go to Australia to live and the kind of profession he had to get into. Whereas Joe, when he sat in that chair, it was all about do as I say. And mine was, if you're going to have an interesting scene, then you have to go against that. And sometimes Joe didn't like my tone. That's why on occasion he would give me a whack or say to me later, I didn't like the way you spoke to me in that scene. And I said, don't forget I'm your father. And I said, no, I remember, but you also have to remember I'm an adult now. You can't treat me like I'm some teenager who has to do exactly what you say. That's in the mafia movies. And in real life, I'm the Michael of The Godfather. That's how I always saw it, which is he came in knowing that he was going to inherit the throne. But at the same time, if an audience is watching you and they think you're a wimp, they're not going to follow you. They love it. And what made people then, as you say, stressful was the danger, the element of danger that was in the scenes we did. Because Joe would, I know by the look in his eye, he wanted to come over and whack me again or knock me out. But I always did it with charm, and Joe was charming as well. So we were unpredictable characters in situations that seem like you would say, okay, this is what this scene is. But in the end, in the way we played it, because we understood about opposites, we didn't come in the same way we finished the scene. They're the opposites. So how do you take a scene, and each scene has its own arc? How do you take the scene and complete it and make it interesting so the audience can't wait for the next scene? So that's what we understood about the drama of being a Dimera and having trained to be able to do that.
A lot of people, I remember when I first saw him come on the show, I said, I know that face. I know that face. And I had that kind of memory. I've seen him before. And then I remembered Jaws 2. He was in Jaws 2 with Roy Scheider.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he was in a lot of other stuff too, but that's what I remembered him being in. I think that was like 1978.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's where I remember the face. I'm like, I knew I'd seen this face before.
yeah. He's I don't know what it is. More and more, I think it's because the way it ended. It was a sad ending. You know, when you have someone who's really powerful in life as well, and you see what takes place and what dementia can do to
Oh,
somebody,
man.
um, to see him not be at his height was very sad for me because he didn't even recognize me in the end. You know,
Yeah.
that last day where I kissed him in the room, and as I left, I heard him say to the nurse, "Who was that?" After 40 years of more than 40 years that I've known him. So that you know, humanity, it's an interesting thing what it teaches us, and how do we are interpreters of life. As writers, you're interpreters of a story. How do you bring that together and make somebody, because it wasn't always about anger, it was also love issues. It was about not taking orders. It was about breaking bread, having respect for the elders. It was all those elements that you bring to life. And I remember even studying with Stella Adler. I mean, that wonderful teacher, as tough as she was, really made you look at the fact that how big was that sky in the south? What kind of manners did they have when they sat? What kind of chair were you sitting in? What kind of shoes were you wearing as that character? All those elements added to what you become whole as a character. And because we're a fast element of shooting and pulling it together, you have to have those qualities because some actors feel that that's where the ego hits, that they're enough with their personalities and how they look and their swagger. And I always think, no, what is it they still don't know about me? And so I think it's always interesting to be able to have a secret, whatever that secret may be, you know, when you
Right.
walk in that room. I didn't always tell Joe everything. I would surprise him, even on the take, you know. To me, a smart actor always keeps an element of surprise in the scene. I don't, otherwise, it becomes kind of mundane and boring. You've already done it. But if you have if you go three-quarters of the way and then when they say action, you have an element of surprise, maybe in tone, maybe in attitude, or maybe in the way you say a line that you
Right.
didn't say it in the one rehearsal.
Right.
And I know that's thrown actors, but I like the element of surprise. I like an actor who throws the ball a little harder sometimes rather than dropping it.
There have been, lots of characters who people hate with a passion, whether it's in television or movies. And in my opinion, it was different for Tony and Stefano Dimera. And just like you talked about, sort of a love-hate relationship with a lot of people who, maybe wanted to, like you guys all the time, but obviously found it difficult to do. What do you think it was about your roles on the show that made people, root for both of you sometimes?
Well, that famous morning at 8 o'clock where Joe said to me, "This is crap. I am not going to say this and you're not going to talk to me that way." And I said, "Well, I am, and I'm not changing anything, and we get paid well, so why don't we just do it?" And he screamed at me at 8 o'clock in the morning. I thought, where do we go from here? Everybody froze on the set. And I just said, "Come on, Joe, let's go." I didn't let it throw me or anything, but I waited till the scene came that I gave it back at him. I used the emotion. It's like I watched something about Meryl Streep the other day where she talked about an actress who died, and she had said before she died, "Let's not be sad. Let's create something out of it." So if you have a channel to put it through, you release it rather than going upset and huffing and puffing, and it gets nowhere except it builds up your anger, and you could cause an accident going home or hit somebody in the wrong at the wrong time or wrong target. But I think the personalities were such that we were stronger than most of the white boys, as I call them on the show,
Yeah.
you know, the Hortons and the Bradys. And we both had fun torturing them in some way. You know what I mean? It wasn't just because it was written. We enjoyed it because we knew they were the heroes. So they had to really challenge us. And so, you know, when you had a character like John Black, who'd look at you sideways, huffing and puffing and doing his whole thing, I was laughing inside because it didn't threaten me at all, or Joe. You know, both of us would laugh afterwards. But that's what we had. And I think the enjoyment of the way we played the characters, that the audience felt that as well. And if you
Absolutely.
don't, you know, you got to have a baddie to have a goodie. You know,
Right.
you can't. Otherwise, what's he winning? You know, a consolation prize at the end? No. So, you know, if you're going to go out with gusto. And just like, you know, every time I had a death, it was violent and big. And then when I came back, it was with dignity. And,
Right.
and then you look at everybody and saying, fools, I didn't die. This is what happened, you know, the
Right.
tricks to the trade, you know, to the story. But no, people, I mean, especially, I mean, women are attracted to men who are volatile in some way. You know, they find that in, I'm not saying all women. I mean, it's nice to have
Sure.
a man that's good and family oriented and all this. But, you know, sometimes you do feel attracted to someone that's a little bit different, a little more, I'd like to get him and show him.
Right.
You know, it was always, we never left them going, oh, when's he going to go? You know, like you see people writing on social media who they like, who they don't like. Some people would take it personally and think we were like that, but that's, you can't help that. You know, I mean, I did get attacked with umbrellas and women coming up to me and scolding me and older women saying, "Oh, I love you," you know. So you get all types, but the fact that they're reacting is the important part.
Right.
If you affect them, how do you affect them? Is it they're going thinking, I can't wait to come back tomorrow and see what he gets for what he's doing, you know, because you had Bo, you know, as the goody and all that. And then sometimes I think I'd go to Joe and I say, Joe, what do you think we should do with this? And he'd say, let's beat the bastards. He says, you know, he would say, it's not in the script, but let's have that attitude with them, you know. So we would share things and then we would celebrate. I would bring in food that I cooked. Joe would bring in some champagne. We'd invite a couple of the actresses and we would celebrate because we were alive and well and enjoying our trade. And it was a phenomenal time. It also gave me the journeys, afforded the journeys I've taken in my life and how I've lived. And so there are many you know, someone said to me the other day that he says, you know, you're in the top 5 of certain characters, and he went on and on. The husband of this director, and there were things I didn't know. I remember going on a plane, and the secretary of the executive producer said, "Do you know you get more mail as Tony than anyone else at that particular time?" And you never know these things,
Right.
and then you find out by mistake or whatever. But the fact that they've kept me on and brought me back 7 times tells you that there was something about the characters. You know, Joe went off and did another show, and then he came back, and so you know we had longevity. And to have longevity, not many people, especially in serial forms, have that. And I think that is because we lived a life that was bigger than most. We explored life more than most because as you find out as you get older that it is only the times when you fight the obstacles and come on the other side that there's growth. So people will refrain from those obstacles, and so they don't change. It all becomes the same. And so Joe and I were very good that way. We challenged ourselves.
You know, speaking of women, you had relationships and worked with a lot of beautiful women on the show. And one of my favorites, and who I've just thought was beyond stunning, was Leanne Hunley, who I believe that you were married to twice on the show. And tell us a little bit about working with her. And also, I believe you guys have stayed friends for a long time.
Yeah, you know what? I was saying to somebody, even though you've worked with people for a long, long time, and you know them and you greet them when you come into work, the substance underneath that friendship, the reality of it being any more than just workers together, you find out after you leave how very few ever get in touch with you again. So the fact that Lauren and Leanne are the two, Lauren Kosler and Leanne Huntley are the two who played my wives as Andre and Tony. They're proved to have substance to me. They have an element about them that we went beyond the characters, and we got to see each other in a different way as people. Leanne is a great friend. So is Lauren. Friendship with Leanne, there was a closeness and that developed, and that came out of trust. You know, I had a couple of times in the early part where, you know, I slapped her on the other side when she was expecting a slap on the right. I gave it on the left so she wouldn't anticipate, where I was dancing with her and dipped her and dropped her and shocked her, but we got a wonderful response. So things like that I did. But she, you know, she's not a person who, we have some things politically that we are opposites and what we believe in, but at the core of her life, she's a lovely human being. She's a very generous spirit. She cares. She, you know, she listened to my podcasts, and so did Lauren. I sent it to some actors, never heard from them again. Bill Hayes, the late Bill Hayes, that wonderful human being who called me up, and suddenly there was this voice on the other side saying, you know, because he was going blind, and he's been one of the most consistent human beings, loving human beings I've ever known. And when he talked about how he listened to the podcast and what he got and how he knew about that character Schliemann who discovered Troy, he was another, and he and Susan too, because that was a friendship that wasn't working in the beginning that became wonderful because we both got each other. But I think with Leanne, you know, when you see us dance, when you see that closeness, the way she flows with me, that's trust.
Yeah.
Lauren, when I did the tango with her, even though we were both nervous because we didn't have enough rehearsal, she's just a wonderful human being, and she's a very intelligent human being. Both of the women. I mean, when we go out for dinner, you have to hear them talk. I mean, they are so well read, and they know so much politically, so much about health. So it's about a package that comes together, that survives all the other elements and obstacles that come your way in a world where show business is not the deepest world. You know, you're used and then you're thrown out. You're used and then you're thrown out. And when people say that, do you feel badly that the way Days has treated you sometimes? And I go, you know what? It's the business. They hire me, I get paid for it, and then they say, okay, it's enough. It's a serial. It's not, I don't get fired because I was doing a bad job. You know, you get a new writer. I mean, this particular writer now even admitted he had a hard time writing for me because I was too deep. And well, what can you say about that? You know,
Right.
now you don't even have Dimeras anymore. I mean, everything's been whitewashed. You know, the Dimeras now and the Hortons and the Bradys, they all look the same. There's no ethnicity like there used to be as a conflict of people's emotions and their belief systems. And so I was fortunate to have, you know, I mean, I work with Kim Zimmer, for instance. I mean, you know, she had to slap me. She ended up slapping me so hard 3 times because she loved to see what kind of balls you had. You know, she even grabbed them one day, you know. She was so, she was really something, but a wonderful actress, and I loved working with her. And I said to her, if she misses the slap again after hitting me that hard that I saw stars, I'm going to whack her. So, that's the kind of relationship. But, it was a great, but we don't know each other since then. We haven't, I think I saw her once somewhere and waved. But Leanne to me is, because I said to her, oh, I think I may move back to Australia. And she goes, but you are coming back. I said, no, if I move back to Australia, I'm moving back, And so she said, well, what about me? I said, well, you're going to probably move back to Seattle. So, it's a relationship much deeper than your normal friendship for many reasons.
Right. Another amazing actress who's been on the show on and off since 1976 is Deidre Hall, who plays Dr. Marlena Evans. And throughout the course of her existence on the program, she's experienced what some might consider to be some of the most outrageous circumstances of any character in soap opera history. These include being possessed by the devil 2 different times, plummeting from a 30-story window and she survives, used as a surrogate for genetically engineered babies, Rex and Cassie during a 4-year coma where she was presumed dead, and be involved in a plane crash, mind controlled, to believe she was a serial killer, targeted by several serial killers. I mean, and becoming pregnant late in life and suffering a miscarriage, which caused her to have hysterical amnesia. Kidnapped numerous times over the past 45 years on that show. And the show was created in 1965 by the Cordays, and you've talked about it. The writers over the years have taken, I guess you would say, quote, many liberties with the plot twists and turns, and some of the ones I've talked about mentioning with Marlena, of course, with Andre and you and Stefano and Roman Brady, John Black situation, and lots of others. However, the audience has loved it most of the time and probably laughed a lot, and it works very well for this show. Why do you think it's always, pretty much worked?
Well, it helps that you've had new writers who bring new interpretation. It's like a restaurant that brings in a chef and he creates all these wonderful meals that people come for. And then you hire a new chef and they bring a different interpretation. Some work, some don't. Some writers like Pat Falcon Smith, I thought, coming from GH, she elevated. She created Tony Dimera. She created Stefano Dimera. She brought the Dimeras in, and they became, to me, the most interesting story on the show, and
by far.
And so when she left, there was a couple of male writers that came in that were really great, I thought, because they had big thoughts, big stories, almost Machiavellian. James Riley was one, and then some people come in and take away everything that all the others had built on. And what they end up being is ordinary because of the way they see life. Right. So depending on how and what the writer has experienced and what kind of imagination can only go as far as how and what you've envisioned in life and what you've witnessed, of what you've read. But sometimes people, it's just that we have some good things today, but we certainly don't have the filmmakers we used to. We certainly don't have the storytellers we used to. I mean, Scorsese and Spielberg and some of the Brit directors and, Oppenheimer, this director has such an imagination. And I remember meeting him twice. Once he was very cold. And then the second time someone told him who I was in daytime. And he was really very curious. And here I'm trying to think of his name. Oppenheimer, who directed Oppenheimer.
Oh gosh, yeah, and I just watched it a couple of weeks ago.
Yes,
Amazing.
well, and I remember speaking to him for 20 minutes on a stairwell because he was very curious as about how what I did and how I did it, and you see the dimensions in which he makes his stories are absolutely huge. But in daytime we got away with a lot of stuff. some things that oh, come on, you can't get away with that, but then somehow you do. And so it depends on whose life is being interpreted through writing and putting into characters. And if you don't know how to envision power, if you don't know the difference between an ethnic character and an Anglo-Saxon character that has always been, we're still having it. Look at the Arabs and look at us. I mean, it's still the Jews and the Arab. It's still ethnic against Anglo, and so they've. I mean, the show's going to be 60 years old soon, and it's good for Ken because his family invested in him to continue, and he has. Sometimes, like everything, sometimes they're great, and there are other times where people will say this show is not what it was, which they talk about, and so.
Christopher Nolan, the director.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan, he's something.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. It just came to me. I was like, I had to say, I thought it would. How do you think Tony's character evolves throughout your now, 5 decades on the show, from the very beginning to the last time that you were on?
Well, women write him differently than men, I think. Sometimes he used to be very romantic and trustworthy, and then he'd throw in a diabolical side. So to me, is when things became mundane, I changed the tone. It's like I said something to friends of mine recently, and they were in shock because of my tone. How can you talk to your friends that way? I said, because you're not getting it. And, there's something when people want life to be gossamer and beautiful. Well, it's not. You just have to look outside your door and see the amount of homeless people that are existing these days and see what it's like to be in their shoes and struggle. And so people don't like to be spoken to. When they're in the middle of a dance and you interrupt the dance and you take over, they don't like it. But it's okay when they do it behind your back. So I like to call things. I don't like what they call third-partying situations. I don't like it when people can't face me with something. And also why people text more these days than they do call you. When someone calls you, you hear the voice, you hear the emotions, you know what they're going through. So you have, it's human. So you have this discussion. But when it's text, that's where things get into trouble.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. Yeah.
People hide behind their writings because it means they want distance and they don't want to get involved. So what does that mean? What are we becoming? Separate human beings. Yeah, we are friends, we are separate, but we walk together, but separately. Just like Khalil Gibran said, you walk together, but separately. And so what you get from all these bloody texts, which just drives me, because people don't realize, it's like when people go on social media and dismiss something, and you want to say to them, excuse me, do you know what it's like for this person to have gone through this before you're making judgments? Or the way they make judgments on Biden, and they keep pushing the fact that he's 81 years old. I mean, there's a thing in this country about, which really pisses me off because we all get there, about people's ages, and that they get that they're stunned because they don't. So they use that as an element of ridicule.
Right.
And it's just what you're saying is that when you get older in this country, you're not worth anything. You're being discarded. Well, when you go to Europe, it's a whole different picture. When people who are younger talk to an older person with disrespect, you'll get a slap or something, a whack of some kind, an awakening of some kind. You just don't. That's why there's those stages of man that Jake said in As You Like It. Every decade has a stage to life. And that's how you make those transitions as you get older. But when they start saying that someone like Biden, who has served so many years in the Senate and as a vice president, whether you like his politics or not, don't take away for how long he has lasted, and he's still working at 81 years old. I don't understand that. And I cannot bear when people come on social media and just ridicule him. And then you find out, what have they achieved
Right.
in
I stay
life?
off of Twitter completely because people are just so brutal. Brutal.
Oh, I block them.
Yeah.
I,
So
I block people who come on and make judgments and ridicule people, because I think, it's tough enough existing. It's tough enough raising families. It's tough enough having to drive around in a city like Los Angeles or New York. It's tough enough with our educations, where people are coming and making judgments, even with the gay and lesbian situation, where they're still pointing fingers, and you're thinking, are you in the present with what's happening in life? But what people do is they take it off themselves and blame others and point fingers. And I just want to say is, take a good look at yourself, because from where I'm sitting, there's a lot of work to do there. And so you hang around people who are winners. That's what I like. And you'll find out in life that sometimes you're outgrowing people and you've got to move on, even at the expense that they will ridicule you or say something negative of why you left the pack.
very true.
Anyway, that's my sermon for today.
That's okay. You're allowed to do that on here. How do you personally define success in the entertainment industry, and has that definition evolved throughout your career?
Sitting around a watering hole called my dining table, where you sit around with your guests, your friends, new friends, and you share bread, a glass of wine, and because you've had success, even some of your failures, and you share great stories. That's, to me, a sign of success, when everybody leaves and says, what a great evening it was. Or at 1 o'clock in the morning, you have to say to them, time to go. That's success to me. It's that kind of relaxation. It's being able to go home. But the only thing is, the family has never been there with you when you've gone through the struggles. They've only seen the wins.
Right.
And sometimes when they haven't seen the struggles, they will criticize or dismiss it. And you think, well, the truth lies within you, and you are responsible for that truth. And therefore, that's what you take with you in life.
Well, last question about days is, what would you say, if you could maybe pick one? I know there's been so many, most memorable or your favorite storyline that you were involved in during your time that you've been in Salem?
I think it was Andre. What would I pick Andre? Right. I think it was Andre when he dressed up as the clown, when he dressed up, as that ugly woman who kicked around and locked Sammy and my brother EJ in the sauna. I mean, they were fun things. I mean, I even remember there was a gym scene, and I was talking to these two extras. They were saying, what's it like playing your character and everything? And then when I came back, dressed up in drag, one of them turned to the other and said, that's a transsexual. They didn't know it was me. So I went, how am I going to? So when the crew laughed at me when I came on stage, I didn't take it as an embarrassment, but I thought, I'm going to have the joke is going to come from me. So I looked in the mirror. The director wasn't happy about what I did because it wasn't in the script and he didn't think of it. But when I looked in the mirror and I called myself some ugly broad, when I caught myself, I said, my God, you are some ugly broad. Those stories, I like because they were different. I mean, I had to get, when you get into disguise, even when I played the nurse, when you get in disguise, something about you changes. You feel like you can get away with things, you can be stupid. I mean, the clown, when I did pirouettes in around Sammy, Alison Sweeney, I thought, oh my God, I can do this, I can do that, I can flip around, I can go down on one knee, I can fly on the chair and go right up to the hospital bed. All those things come out of you. And that's what I loved about Andre. You're not afraid to make yourself look like a fool. Even in the early stages of Andre, when I was on the run and I was doing Richard III, how did I come off stage and upset? The wig had moved and I left it there so that I would look ridiculous and that it was a bad performance and that he was an amateur, things like that. So they're the times, I think. There are times with Tony when it was very romantic with Anna and we danced and we had those dining scenes. I even liked the last things that Ron Calavati wrote for us when we were in the restaurant and she told me she was pregnant. I mean, things like that, but they're so absurd, but at the same time, you play along with it because it's fun. And the audience is having is in on the joke,
Right. That's great. All right, let's talk about this podcast that you decided to start, the Lost Treasures podcast. I believe you first went into the studio to record your first episode this past July 25th of 2023, and it premiered September 5th of last year. In quote, an amazing story by Thaao Penghlis, Lost Treasures transports you to the time of Heinrich Schliemann. Is that pronounced?
Schliemann.
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 Schliemann and his amazing discoveries, unquote. Without spoiling your first podcast, because you go into obviously during a lot of detail, tell the audience a little bit more about him and who he was to the archaeological world.
Well, he was called the father of archaeology because in the 19th century, the only real archaeologist in those days was an archaeologist who was uncovering Pompeii in Italy. And that's where Schliemann went to see how and learn, because he was still an amateur. He did go to the Sorbonne in Paris and learn to be an archaeologist, but because he had a lot of money, he could afford a lot of mistakes. And, nobody believed that the books on Homer, the greatest piece of literature from the ancient world, was written in the 8th to 9th century during an illiterate age. So they were told by bards, these stories. They would go into places where men would hang around and hear about that the land that they were walking upon had been fought for by ancient warriors. This was their ancestry. And so everybody thought, well, it's just mythology. What Schliemann did was he believed that the Iliad, which was the first, and then the Odyssey, that the Iliad was really a map to finding Troy. So he believed when he was a young boy that he was going to find the treasures of Troy when he was 9 years old, and at the age of in his 50s, it came true. And what he believed was when they finally excavated in Hizalik, on a mound in Turkey, there were 9 cities built on top of each other. His mistake was he thought that Troy, which was during 1250 BC, that was the era that would be at the bottom of this mound. Little did he realize it was really more in the middle. So he cut through and ruined a lot of evidence of Troy. They had to put it together, but what he found at the steps of where the entrance of the Trojan horse that beat the Trojans, the Greeks beat the Trojans in that war at that time, was that he found in the corner of this what was it, this entrance that was quite high actually. They found all this treasure. What he thought belonged to the Trojan War really belonged to an earlier Bronze Age, which was 2500 BC. Still, what he found was extraordinary. When you think just one headpiece had 16,000 pieces of gold attached to it. Enough that it was such a, he was admired, and yet he was admonished by so many critics because there was like anything, a person who is an individual who stands out, they become jealous of what he did. And the way he communicated was through the press. That was the social media of the time. And they used to get upset with him because he thought he would jump to conclusions too quickly, whereas the Greek archaeologist Stamatakis would say to him, you know, in Greece, when they went to the Trojan treasure, after the Trojan treasure, and they went to the Mycenaean gold, he said, you know, when I write to my people out there who are following my story, if I make a mistake, they will read of the mistake at the same time. But if I am correct, they will be enthralled by what I've discovered. So there was always these clashes. And because Greece wouldn't allow him to have a wing in the museum, a Schliemann wing with the Trojan hoard, it ended up giving it to Germany. And then Germany loses it through the Second World War, and they thought it was bombed by the Allies. No, because the Russians had stolen over 5 million pieces, not as bad as the Nazis, 5 million pieces of great treasures that belonged to a lot of Jewish families. They took it all to and buried it under the Pushkin Museum. And then in 1994, it was exposed, and therefore we realized that the treasure wasn't lost, that it was now in Russia. And the other gold that which was phenomenal, even greater than Troy, was the masks that he thought belonged to Agamemnon, where the Trojan War started. And that's when he uncovered those masks in the soil. There he would see the warriors still intact and then disappear into dust within seconds. So, you know, what he found and what he believed and what he brought to life, and that's why they called him the father of archaeology, because he brought our ancient history forward and said, this is not a myth. These are real stories. And the third, which I love because I met with Crawshaw, who was in where is the real island of Ithaca that belonged to Ulysses after the Trojan War. So it all became one long story that took over 20 years. And so I flew in there because I thought, I can't tell the story like I've told the others because I walked the ancient road. I want to do the same. And so I met with Crawshaw, and he took me up and down the mountain, and we trekked up in these different areas, and even to look out, having lunch. And then I looked at this cove, and he says to me, that's where Ulysses came back from the Trojan War. I mean, I cannot tell you what that did to me. I had to go into that water and swim in there and be part of that element, so that when I walked that long, long beach, I thought about Ulysses and coming home and what it must have been like, and the fact that it was not a myth, that it was true. And so they're uncovering all those things now. And then I go to my fourth, which was my favorite because it tells all the different things that happened to me while exploring my history of the world and the dangers that I put myself in. And, you know, I could have been, you know, with Hezbollah. You see who Hezbollah is today. I mean, they dragged me out of the car and threw me against the wall thinking I was an Israeli spy, or in the Cairo Museum because I was on my own. This secret agent was there thinking that he could get money out of me in some way to use in entrapment. So, you know, thank God of my own smarts, and I can smell a rat. I played along until I exposed him, and he was furious, but I knew I was in danger. So that's what the fourth one is about. And you know, I think to myself, it's been a great life, but I thought, God, you know, I'm still exploring it. You know, I think that's what is the answer for me for longevity, is that what keeps me alive and interested. And then I would use all that information, come back and play Tony or Andre and use that energy in there. You know, you never wait.
What inspired you to create the archaeological podcast, and, you know, your background? How has it influenced the content and direction of the podcast?
Well, then I wrote my first book, Places, and then I went into the cookbook. And then I started to write short stories, and I thought, then people started to say, you know, they liked the sound of my voice. And as I got older, it had more gravitas to it because of the experiences, that it was, you know, you can tell by people's voices how hollow they are, or how rich they are, or how involved they are. And that's why voice to me is very important, as opposed to a text. And, there's, anyway, I won't get on that. I think I thought one day, I want to tell these stories because we'd be sitting around the table, as we said, what is the price of success that a sign of success, and that is sitting around your watering hole and telling your story. And I always knew who listened and who didn't. And, when you tell a story, is it coming from your ego or is it coming through you as opposed to from you? And so when I did it, came through me, when someone interrupted, I'd lose track because it was coming through me. And so the source was cut off. There's a source that comes through us all when we say things, do things in life, as opposed to the guy who wants to kick you or admonish you in some way. And that's the ego. And I see that with people. That's the trouble, the more knowledge you attain. That's why my teacher, the great Milton Catsella, said to me his biggest disappointment in life was people. And now I understand what he was saying, because I feel the same way. People are a big disappointment because they use you, they abuse you, they take advantage of you, they don't always embrace you or support you, because we're not miracle workers, but what we are messengers. And those who send a message that is positive, that inspires people. Like I just hosted the Greek Ball for the 15th time. What story did I choose? I chose the story of where I went for 2 weeks up and down the Nile, exploring the holy families where they escaped Herod. I just found that to be fascinating. And so I did that route. And then I told them about the story when I went to a Greek church, and the priest recognized me as a Greek and put his vestments on and blessed me, and then opened the grate and the floor of an ancient church and walked me down, climbed down into an ancient space. And he says, this is where the Holy Family hid. So I told him that story. And it was interesting. When people have not heard a story before, people get bored when they already presume that, oh, you've heard this before. He said this before. So you try to find different ways to tell a story. By the way you start it, the way you build up on how you finish it. But it was, see, for me, my choice, as I said to them, I like to inspire. I don't like to take down. That's easy. To criticize is easily done because all you got to do is just open your mouth and put something down. But to actually go through experiences, as we said, go through obstacles and come on the other side, that's huge. And that's what gives you longevity in life. That's what makes you feel, that's what makes you be able to, like as an actor, walk through, makes a person who has gone through life and is able to succeed and come through a door differently than he did before, or she did before, because something about what they have accepted and have gone through on the other side, that's something about them. Why do some people carry a light and others a dim? Why does somebody come into a room and you say, I don't trust that person? These are all the messages we get when we're listening and when we're being trained. Because I was told a long time ago is we keep coming back into a life because it's part of the soul that hasn't found God yet. So life is a circle to me, and each piece is a lifetime. So you come back in each lifetime so that you complete it, so that you become, I always say, even to priests, just because you studied theology and preaching doesn't mean that you have a direct connection to God. You try to find that, but I'm not a priest. I could have maybe a different connection. But the thing is, knowing who your teachers are and who your enemies are, and knowing who your friends are. And those things are what you then bring to your work, like I do with my characters, and why I think they've been successful and been able to sustain all these years.
Do you plan on going further with the podcast and telling more stories and going further than 4 episodes? Is there another direction you want to go?
Well, I'm writing now a biblical story. It's not that I'm overly religious, but I'm a spiritual man. I don't,
Me too.
I love monasteries. I love sitting with monks. I like to see how they interpret things in life. Um, but there are some great stories out there that haven't been told, or we look at them as postcards. So I'm looking to go beyond the picture and find out what is the real story and where was it seeded. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm thinking, is this a script, a movie script that I'm developing, or is this going to be one of my podcasts? Because I've written a lot of short stories. I wrote one called The Arrogance of a Loser. I wrote one that was The Whispered Past. And I thought, you know what, I could read these stories. And so I think there will be a continuation of a sort. People loved, who have listened to the Schliemann world, because I actually went through it. It wasn't something I just read about. And so I think if people are sitting in a car and they're driving on long, why not tell them a good story? It's like a friend of mine just called me and she said to me, "Oh my God, I just listened to your 4th podcast. I just love those stories, And driving, she said, it was just wonderful. It made the drive shorter somehow."
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? We used to listen to our grandparents. When we were young kids, there was the radio, and our imagination soared out of that. Or our grandparents would tell us stories, or our fathers and mothers would tell us when we were kids. Like my mother used to talk about the earthquakes in Greece when she was a young girl, and my father about his prestigious family and how they were snobs and on the island of Castellorizo. And so all those things are all part of what you collect as a life. And some stories are worth telling.
And you have a really unique and great voice that does make people want to listen more. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've studied archaeology, but back in school and listening, it wasn't boring to me. I mean, just because the information plus your voice. So a combination of the two just kept me wanting to hear more.
Oh, thank you. Well, then that's good, because then I must be on track,
Yes.
and if someone, you say, well, it's not just about whether you like telling stories or not. How are people receiving them? Are people understanding them? Are they interested, or do they turn off after the first 5 minutes? How do you keep somebody there till the end? And so I think because it's also, how do you tell a story? It's not just telling a story. How do you tell a story?
Right.
What's the arc? What's the beginning, the middle, and the end? And how do you entice them in the beginnings? And that's what I try to do with Schliemann. Where he collapses in the gutter in the beginning, and then you flash back into what that life was about. Which was extraordinary. And I've been to his home in Greece, and I've gone, which is now the Numismatic Museum. But I had I met the Minister of Culture, and I had a wonderful afternoon sitting in his mansion when nobody else was there, and imagine what it must have been like when he walked down those stairs with his wife Sophia. And so tomorrow I'm doing an interview with Greece, which will be interesting.
Cool.
They've been a little bit on the difficult side, which is not unusual when it comes to my heritage. It's like they do things back. Someone said to me, when you're Greek and you've had a British education, either in England, Canada, America, or Australia, there's a thing called discipline. About timing, you have all these other elements that makes you professional. But in Greece, you ask people to come for dinner at 7 and they come at 10 and it's okay.
Really?
Things
Wow.
like that. Or they want you to do a movie, then you find out that somebody, like I had that experience where I turned down somebody and then they sabotaged the meeting I was having by coming in, bringing me a gift and telling the people they got me cheap first. And you're going, what? And they start accusing me and they started to believe it. I went, you know what? So there was 3 big projects I was going to do in Greece and I gave them up. I wanted to do it for my parents. I wanted to do something Greek and speak the language and do the scenes, but that didn't work out. So tomorrow I have a big interview with a magazine, and they're just like, what it's taken Whereas here in America, or in Australia, you do an interview, you do an interview.
Right.
There's no dance. You just, you know. And so now, and also coming up is I'm doing with the Santa Monica City College. I'm going to do interviews in their podcast as well. And I'm looking forward to talking to students because I went to USC and I spoke to them, and I was so surprised that these 18 to 23-year-olds knew about Schliemann, knew about the treasures, and they were really interested, and they asked me wonderful questions.
That's
So
awesome.
that's what I love, is to see the youth
Yes.
being interested in what came before them.
When you were talking about meeting the minister of culture, I actually had read that in the you got an interview with Soap Opera Digest last September. They talked about that, and you talked about going to the National Archaeological Museum in Greece, and you walk in the main entrance, and the guy in charge there, I think you said that he had recognized you from Mission Impossible, and you said he gave you a really big hug, and he asked, we love what you've done for Greece, and what can we do for you? And that's when you asked him, hey, I like to meet the minister of culture, and that happened. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, what was beautiful about that was I also happened to mention on a TV show there about the things. They said, do you have any complaints about Greece? And I said, yes, the cab drivers. And they said, the cab drivers. I said, what, you didn't know? Have you ever seen cab drivers in Athens? You hail them down. If they don't like how you look or where you want to go, they just keep driving. Oh, and then they'll pick up 3 other people. They take you in all these different directions. I said, or they don't turn up when you call to go to the airport. So I get a call at the hotel one day, and it's a cab driver. He says, we're not all like that. I want to pick you up and take you to your airport when you're leaving to show you that all Greek cab drivers are not the same. So I said, okay. So, somebody proved me wrong. But, when I was in Greece this summer, I mean, you can't help it. It's an extraordinary country. It's had some terrible times. I mean, to be invaded by Turkey for 350 years and be occupied changed the character of the Greeks, I think. That's why I called it the whispered past, because everything they did was whispering, but they've contributed a tremendous amount. And through my research, I realized that those Greeks that left when the Turks invaded went to Italy. And because the Greeks are really, when you look at their history, great artists, even today, and they were part of the beginnings of the Renaissance in Italy. So I understand why my father spoke Italian, because of the Venetian influence on the island he was born. So, yeah, I just think sometimes the Greeks shortchanged themselves.
Right.
And, they've had a bad history of government stealing the money from their people not paying their taxes. I mean, it's like, but you go there and you sit and you look. I always say, show me an ancient column and I'll tell you a story. I mean, it's just, where else do you sit in a cafe and you're looking at something from the 5th century BC, and that is from the classical age, the golden years of Greece, and you think of what they contributed, their democracy, their, when you look at the architecture of the Acropolis, I mean, how many buildings, even the Romans had copied that architecture, the sculptures they did, the language, even the 2 greatest pieces of literature ever written in the ancient world of Homer, there's a lot that they've contributed, in medicine as well. And you even look at Alexander the Great, you look at all those wonderful pieces of history. And then I think, why are there only 10 million people? Because they can't support themselves. They've been bankrupt so many times because of money being stolen out and taken out of the country. But as a character, I love that you can sit with a grandmother or a grandfather and they tell you stories that have great meaning and depth to them. Their food, it's very healthy. So when you look at all of it, the whole picture, the beautiful physicality of the country. It's really, it's a magnificent heritage, and but it's up to its present to keep it going. And those of us who've left and gone elsewhere, but still talk about our history, is we're the messengers of that country. And I proudly do it. You know, I had to leave Australia to get away from the Greek community in order to appreciate it in America.
Right.
And here I am, you know, 15 times now hosting the Greek ball with all these Greeks. And it's all about dignity. It's all about how the respect of things, you know, that's how things are sustained in life, you know. You tear it down, it dies, you know. It's like you don't water a plant, it dies. If you don't respect a father, a mother, your elders, how do you know what to do when you reach that stage in your life, when you didn't listen to that period where somebody was there to allow you to know this is what you're coming into? You know, that's why we love our grandpas. That's why you see children always sitting with their grandparents, because there's a trust there. They're relaxed. They know they're in their golden years, and you know, they sit and they love their children. It's not demanding anything from them, but just to be loved and loved back. You know,
I have a lifelong friend of mine whose mother was born in Greece, and I just remember she's passed now, but as a kid, she was it baklava.
yes.
Yeah, and she, oh, so good. She used to
Well,
make it all the time. Yeah, so good.
the Turks will say, "Oh, that was ours." Well, you know, if you go to Turkey, I love Turkey. You know, but most of their history is not the Ottomans. You know, a lot of their history is Greek and Roman, and their architecture, their ancient worlds, is not from their history. They invaded and took the country, and the Greeks of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire that contributed so much incredible art that still remains. How did Saint Sophia, which is one of the most beautiful cathedrals I've ever been into, and yet why does it sustain after having been through major earthquakes? Because in the 6th century, the architect, who was Greek, knew that an octagonal shape, when it shakes, stays in place. That's why Hagia Sophia hasn't collapsed.
Wow.
Because they've had major earthquakes.
Yeah.
So they knew, you know, so when you think back that long ago, but it's so funny this time around, I really appreciated the Turks, and I'm thinking I'm Greek, and I appreciate it. They were so lovely. I mean, they're just lovely people, and it's the leaderships, you know, sometimes it's like, you know, you see Putin, and then you see who the Russians can be, you know, lovely people. And then you go and you see Erdogan in Turkey, and but they've got to show how tough they are. But the people were just lovely. The food was wonderful. So I loved Turkey. That was another place I recommend for people to go.
You know, in doing research on you, I found some pretty cool facts I read. I wanted to share a few of them with our audience. One of my favorite actresses was so funny as Marie Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond, the late Doris Roberts. She penned the forward to your book, you know, Places, The Journey of My Days, My Lives.
No, she did it. No, she did the forward on the cookbook.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That it's a,
Yeah,
you know, yeah,
it
it
was,
was,
you know, um, yes, when I asked her, I said, Doris, because she's eaten here so many times, I said, would you do the forward for me? And she goes, oh, what am I going to say, darling? I said, well, you've been eating enough here, and you've always loved the food, and you love the conversations. You're the last to leave. There's got to be something. So anyway, she wrote that for Seducing Celebrities, my cookbook, and you know, we were together in class for 25 years
right.
in workshop.
I
So,
apologize. It was what I read and everything, and sometimes you know, some
oh,
facts are
listen, you
not
can't
right.
always keep those facts straight, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not it wasn't a big mistake. It was one of the books, so you know.
I hope the other ones are right. I read that a little bit before the wedding of Jackie Kennedy to Aristotle Onassis, you had private tea with her.
Yes. That was one of my favorite stories, actually. I mean, I've told it many times, but yes, it was when there was a knock on the door. I was 21 years of age, didn't know much, and I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself because I was working in New York for $75 a week as an apprentice in a gallery that had the best collection in Southeast Asian sculpture, and everything was museum quality. So I began my life sitting in 18th century furniture and English furniture. So when there was a knock on the door and there was Jacqueline Kennedy, and I had a nasty boss, and I opened the door and she says, "I'm terribly sorry, I know I needed an appointment, but I've heard so many wonderful things about the gallery. Could I come in?" So long story short, yes, we had tea and I had made some Greek shortbread cookies. And she and I sat in the gallery for a whole hour before my boss came from his lunch. I'll always remember there's something in when someone's heritage was as rich as hers. And the fact that she had been First Lady and the way she conducted herself. I felt unselfishly. She had a great image for the American woman and for the American class system. And you could take her everywhere. And she had that strut when she walked. And, she was wife to Kennedy. So
Right.
you think of that. So the fact that she was interested in where I came from and wanted to discuss, and I was one of those students in life who knew every piece in that gallery, and I knew exactly the date of those pieces. It's like you go into a store these days and you say to somebody, "How much is that?" And they go, "Oh, wait a minute." Then you have to wait till they go through the book to find out. They don't know what they're dealing or what they're selling. They don't know. So that kind of, I said, why don't you do your homework? Why don't you become a better salesperson or a better person at your job? And so I felt my responsibility, if you want to make a story interesting, you better know the history behind each piece. So when she would ask for a piece, like there was a camel from what they call the Wei period in China, which was 4th century, found in a cave. What did that mean? What was that camel about? What was its purpose in its history? So I would know all about it. Plus, I would know how much it cost. And so when she asked questions about all of them, I knew them in my head. So I would just
That's
do it.
impressive. That's awesome. I bet she was very impressed with you.
Well, she called back and she bought a piece, so that was good. And my boss,
Yeah.
well, he's gone now, but I remember even years later, couldn't believe that Jacqueline Kennedy came in while he was having lunch, and he would have wanted to meet her and sell her things and say that he's friends with Jack, because he was one of those
Yeah.
men who only wanted to be with people who were important and had money. So, so she, and that was one thing I was able to throw at him, that because he didn't take me to lunch,
That's
I
funny.
stayed. And then,
Karma.
yes, that was
Did
good. That
did
was
you
good.
sell a suit to Robert Redford?
Yes. Oh, there goes that story. Oh yeah, he's an interesting character, Redford. Um, he was not very friendly. He would come in 3 times, and when he saw that my boss wasn't there, he'd just leave. It was bordering on rude at the time. And then I realized that, he's a private human being. I didn't understand it first. So, of course, like most people, I made judgments.
Sure.
Until one day I said to him, "No, wait a minute, I've got this suit for you that Roland told me, my boss, to show you." And he goes, "What?" And that stopped him. How do you stop somebody from playing the routine? Is he idiot? No, gone.
Right.
My boss said, "This time, you better get him to stay." And so I said, "I'll lock the door, I won't let anybody else in, and we'll have a private fitting." And so I always remember the suit. It was a brown velvet suit with bone buttons, and I insulted him in front of the mirror because he had a couple of barbells and told me he had to lose that in order to wear the suit properly. And he was aghast, and so was I that it came out of my mouth, because I had a mouth. But he was great. And then, to believe it or not, there he was at La Scala in Beverly Hills 10 years later. I'm sitting there with a friend, and this friend of mine said, "Oh my God, do you know celebrities? Where are those celebrities? Coming from Australia." I said, "Oh, well, let's go to La Scala. There's usually celebrities there." And there was Rex Harrison on one table, and there was Paul Newman and Robert Redford. And wouldn't you know, Redford gets up, comes past my table and shakes my hand and said, "Hi, Thaao, how are you?" And I
So
went,
cool.
"Look at that." He says, "You know Redford?" I said, "Yeah, it's a long story." But, listen, our lives are about the stories we collect, right? So I tell those stories, and some people have heard it, some people haven't. But yes, it was.
And that's after probably, the two big movies and when the seven was The Way We Were and All the President's Men. That's probably after he had done those or sometime
Oh,
around there.
oh yes, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yes, and the Sting. I mean, he's got a wonderful history, plus his direction and having won. Um, yeah, no, I mean, he's been a great contributor to the industry, and he's got a great image.
Yeah. Yeah. You never hear anything bad about him.
No, no, because he's a very private person. That's why some people try to intrude on your privacy, and they said, "Is this did?" And they ask you a question, you go, "Oh, wait a minute, what business is that of yours?" You go, "What? What?" I said, "What business is that of yours?" So, people try to intrude, and you've got to say, there are boundaries in life.
Yes, there are. I
Mm.
believe you have, Thaao, three siblings, Constance or Connie, Pauline, and George. Tell us just a little bit about them, please.
Well, I'm third. My sisters are the eldest. In many ways, I felt that they were shortchanged, and I could see it now in their later years. The men were the ones that had to go out there and earn. Women had to stay home. So they were arranged marriages, really, in a way. And so my mother took them out of school because we were poor, and she needed money to put us through school. And my father wasn't making enough. And I always swore to myself, one of these days I'm going to leave and make a lot of money and take care of my parents. And as they say, you go beyond your parents. But my brother George became a teacher, my sisters housewives. Um, and in many years later, they weren't as equipped as a modern woman because of their training. There was very little social training. There was very little education. Um, so the boys, because my sister would say, "You were so lucky that you went to America and became something did something in your life." I said, "Yeah, but look what they did when I left. Look what they said when I left. Look at the scandals they created that were false because they didn't want me to succeed." I said, "I paid a price for that. Plus, I paid a price for not being with family, being raised by the kind of family that I was raised." And but then the day that I won and was able to go back, it was always worth it. And I speak to my brother at least twice a week and have for all these years. I call my sister once a week. The other one's harder to get. She's not as social. I don't want to talk much on the phone, but I'm still close to them. When I go home, I see them, and my brother's children are becoming very successful. My sister's children, all well educated and lawyers and engineers and bankers, and so they all went their own way, and just like I did. But my day was when you didn't. The sons never left before the daughters got married. So, and I did. And so that brought scandal. Why would he
Right.
leave? All that type of stuff. But still, they were my roots.
Ava and Peter, your mother and father, I know they've both passed on into heaven. What effect did they have on your life?
Um, I said to my father once, just because you came in before me doesn't mean you know more than I do. Because I've had to go and search out there the things I wasn't taught when I was growing up. I had a longing to learn about what I didn't know or what they weren't being an example of. My father was tough with me. There's something about me he didn't. I think he thought I wasn't going to amount to anything in some way. I think he saw himself in me. There's nothing worse than seeing a father feel like a loser. And then I realized the struggles he went through when immigrants in Australia were not welcome because they were part of the labor force, they were a foreign entity, they brought in a different kind of cuisine. And then I look at my mother, who was a school teacher, who played the muzuki, who had a wonderful nature. She was a very proud woman, small woman, but she was the only one who knew I was going to amount to something. My brother hoped, but my mother knew. She always said to me, "You're going to do something. I know you are. You're my eldest son, and I expect that from you." And so when I did, and sent them overseas 6 times, whereas their cousins and their other relatives didn't have the finances to do what they were doing, I brought their life, plus being the first Greek actor out of Australia to be successful, that added to their image and the way they were elevated, as my brother would say. My sister, you elevated the family. And so one of the things I always thought to myself is no scandal. Don't embarrass the family. Don't let anything get back that would embarrass them. So I was very careful with what I assess and who I associated with. But I love older people. They know more. They treat you better. They eat better.
Yeah.
All the things that older people do because they've lived, as opposed to the young ones who are looking to, what have you got to offer that I can use?
Yeah. Sense of entitlement too. It's a lot of them.
Yes. Yeah.
What is the most important or the most important lessons that you've learned in your life?
Not always easy, but to give without expecting. To know who's walked into your home and allow them to stay for a short time or for a long time, understanding, listening to their voices and so on. That tells me a lot about where a person's coming from. And I've learned that, it's really up to you. That if you want a success, don't wait for anybody else. Find your own way through it. With ethics. Ethics to me are very important. Because if you cheat, you'll be cheated. If you've studied hard, you'll be rewarded. If you treat people with respect, you'll be respected. If you love well, people will love you back. But there's always an enemy that creeps through. And that one, and there's been a few, you keep them close, but at a distance.
Right. How can people find you and follow you on social media, and where can they go to listen to the podcast?
Well, Spotify's is very good. When you go on Spotify, you'll see all 4 podcasts. Social media at Thaao Penghlis. There's been so many, and I'm sure with a lot of people, celebrities and all that, who get, the imposters. There are so many. It's like every week, someone's stealing your identity.
Right.
And I think to myself, oh, you silly idiots, why don't you find your own identity and make something of that? Otherwise, what are you wasting your life for? Do you have nothing really about yourself that you have something to be proud of or to say? But go in and criticize and take down and people who do that. I mean, there's just so many that have a voice but no voice.
Right.
Who steal because they can't have the balls to discover for themselves and to become something within themselves. What they're doing is postponing their life. You don't want to postpone your life because I'm telling you, once you get into those decades and you haven't made those transitions, it's going to be tough. And sometimes, you look at you're standing on a foundation that's a little bit rocky. But I think, faith is important, respect of other people and how they're doing something, and associating with people who win in life. Not the losers are losers. I mean, they're going to always pull things down, and they're never going to want it for you anyway.
Right.
They'll find some way of disrespecting you or putting you down, if not in front of you, behind your back. So I'm finding there's less and less of those as I've gotten older now, and my friends have gone, a lot of them, and those who've remained, they're okay. But
Once again, go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish
no,
up.
I just think in life, those that you collect in the end are very few, but worthwhile.
Yes, they are. Once again, I wanted to thank our two new sponsors, Roof and Nail with co-owner Kelly Potter and Buckley's Grill with owners Ken Dick and Jeff Fiorinelli. Thaao, as a teenager, I got hooked on Days of Our Lives, and a big part of the reason were the Dimeras and the intriguing storylines. And I remember sometimes being disappointed, because usually you knew in the first scene before the show came on if it was going to be a show with the Dimeras on there. And I remember, that famous line from McDonald Carey, like sands through the hourglass, so were the days of our lives. And you knew by the time that came on, most of the time, whether you or Stefano weren't going to be in an episode. And when you weren't, it was disappointing. And you were really good on Mission Impossible. And I'm so happy that you have this new podcast, and it looks like that you possibly might have another one, or just like you said, maybe a script coming out, and you get to share one of the biggest loves of your life, archaeology, with the world. And I'm sure it's already being become a tremendous success. So that's just really great.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I appreciate you coming back on for part 2 with me today. And maybe down the road, as you do more, you can come back on for another part and talk about something new. I'd love to have you back on again, maybe sometime in the next few years.
Well, thank you for being such a good host and doing your homework.
Thank you very
and
much.
Asking me good questions and being interested.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time. And if you would hold on for just 1 second at the end. Thank you. And everybody, thank you for listening or watching.